Hello and welcome to Crux Investor. We spoke earlier today to Gerard Barron, who's the CEO of DeepGreen Metals. They're a deep sea miner. We learn about what that involves today. And if you want our opinion on the conversation or the company itself, you can get that at cruxinvestor.com/club, where you can also get company reports, feedback from experts from around the world on a variety of commodities. You can also get summaries of other interviews that we have done. There's also a thriving community of investors sharing their ideas and thoughts. And if you try now, there's a 7-day free trial. We'd also like your feedback, so do click the like button, leave your comments below. And if you want to see some of the topics we discussed, take a look at the description below. Gerard, how are you doing, sir?
Matthew, I'm well. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Good weekend. So where are you? I know the story of where you are, but you've got to tell people where you are because those curtains need explaining.
Well, my daughter attends Leeds University this year, and we dropped her off a week ago. And I'm in that rare period of not traveling much, but I'm about to start traveling in the next few days. So I've taken the opportunity to come and check in on her and make sure she survived Freshers Week okay, and before I head to the United States.
Good man. Got to be done.
Lugubrious background.
They don't seem to have changed too much since I was there, and probably since you were there. Whoever's in charge of decor needs a word.
Well, hopefully the money's going into education, right?
Let's hope. Your money.
Yeah.
Right. Well, look, we are here today to hear about your company as a private company. Just let people know that, but that may be changing at some point in the future. DeepGreen Metals, you're going to tell us all about it. Why don't you give us a 1-minute overview of the business, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Yeah. So we're all about opening up a new industry, and that industry is ocean metals. And so, it's we know that 70% of the planet is covered in water. And, land-based mining and other fossil fuel extraction all happened first because it was more obvious. But actually, these metals still form in the ocean in some ways the same as they form on land. But in our case, we're focused on nodules, or we call them rocks, polymetallic rocks. And we've been at this for a decade, and we're about opening up this new industry. And it's an amazing story, Matthew, which I look forward to sharing with your viewers, because what you'll learn is that it's a resource that's made for now, because it contains all of the battery materials we need to fuel this green transition.
Okay, so I need to understand the business model, because you've been at it 10 years. You must know what you're going to hone in on and all the big questions, because I don't know much about this other than obviously in the oil and gas business, they do a lot of deep sea drilling, but I'd love to understand the parallels to that. But let's start with the business plan. So 10 years in, what are you trying to do? So
the first thing that we have are exploration licenses. So we've secured those. And we're in the what's known as the high seas. So the high seas are governed by the International Seabed Authority. And the ISA was established in 1994 with the express purpose of putting in place a regulatory regime to allow the development of this industry. So we have exploration licenses. So over the last decade, we've been busy defining the resource, and that's been a very easy task because we're focused on one area called the CCZ, the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, where these nodules were discovered way back in the 1870s by explorers funded by the Royal Society. And so we're focused on that area only. And it's a 2D resource, so these nodules literally lay on the ocean floor. And so we have, as a Canadian company, we're 43101 compliant. We have 2 inferred resource statements. We're about to announce part of that moving to become an indicated resource. And in fact, we've even taken some of it to measured. And so defining the resource is one of the things. The next thing is to carry out the work that's required to submit our application to move from exploration to extraction. And so we're in the middle of very extensive work programs which are focused on environmental permitting. So we recently announced that we are spending more than $60 million to complete that work. We'll have more than 100 discrete studies. In fact, it's the largest ever ocean floor to surface environmental ocean study. And we're answering the questions of what are the impacts of removing these nodules. What about any dust that gets kicked up? What's the impact of that? And that will all form the basis of our environmental impact assessment. We're busy building our pilot harvesting system. So we're doing all the things that you would do with any project to get it to a bankable feasibility stage. And
okay, so there's a lot of things you've described there which sound like conventional mining, and it should be. You're trying to find metals in rocks. It just happens you've got a lot of water involved as well, seawater as well, which I guess I suspect has its own challenges. So a 43. So what are you after? What type of metals are you after in these nodules or these rocks? First of all, I want to understand which market you're in.
Yeah, sure. So these nodules form very differently to anything on land. They actually precipitate. And because I've been on a train traveling to Leeds, it's one of the rare occasions in my life where I don't have a nodule. I ran out the door too quickly. But they're about the size of a potato, so they fit in the palm of your hand. They come in medium, large, and small. And they form through a very slow precipitation process. So they precipitate the metals that are either in the ocean water or in the sediment upon which they sit. And so the reason why the CCZ, which is about 1,000 miles off the coast of Mexico, is the area of interest, is because the Rockies and Andes were covered in nickel and copper, and as all of those metals eroded into the ocean, they settled in the Pacific Ocean and provided the feedstock for these nodules to form. So our nodules are very rich in nickel and copper and cobalt and manganese. And they also contain rare earths as well, but we're focused on those first four metals primarily. And so in other parts of the ocean, for example, in the North Sea, you can also find nodules, but they're not worth recovering. They're just iron hydroxides and a little bit of manganese, and they're not worth picking up. Whereas our nodules are very valuable because they contain around 1.4% nickel and about 1.1% copper, 0.2% cobalt, and about 30% manganese. So it's an amazing resource given what times we live in.
Yeah, I guess very attractive to anyone thinking or liking the whole EV thematic that's going on at the moment. And I guess that's where you're aiming the story. I noticed you mentioned that you will have spent to complete the studies that you're doing, the EIA or equivalent thereof, $60 million. So who's been funding this to date?
Well, the $60 million is only the environmental work.
Yeah.
We will have spent about $200 million. And so
okay.
We've been primarily backed by people like myself, private investors who and more recently we've had some larger strategic type investors as well. So Maersk, who is a shipping company, invested about 4 years ago. One of the largest pipe layers in the deep ocean for oil and gas, Allseas, invested a significant sum last year. And even Glencore invested some money some years ago. Okay.
So Maersk shipping, did they give you cash or just lend you a ship? How's that work?
Yeah, no, it was a combination. But it was primarily about 4 years ago. What we were really looking for was validation. And at that time, Maersk were going through a massive restructure. But primarily what they give us is a boat that's moored down in San Diego, that's crewed and full of diesel. And basically they bring their expertise in managing these large complex projects, and so they've been a very instrumental partner. But in the case of Maersk 4 years ago, it was primarily services. In the case of Allseas and Glencore, it was cash.
Gotcha. And around 200 million in total, which is inclusive of that 60 million on the environmental component. Okay, yeah. So you talked about the International Seabed Authority and being around since 1994. So, I mean, 25, 26 years there. Yeah. Are they the equivalent of your regulator? I mean, who regulates this? Because when you talk about a 43101 and measured and indicated and inferred and so forth, not too many people know about mining underwater. I mean, mining, not oil and gas. So how does it all work?
So the regulator is the International Seabed Authority, and it was established in 1994 under the guidance of the United Nations. And so there are 167 member states plus the European Union. And so think of it as a United Nations type organization. And their job is to put in place the regulatory environment, which means the regulatory controls, which means the oversight through standards and guidelines and so on. Do they know a lot about 43101s? Probably not. That's our job, to bring that expertise, because we need to define our resource so we can continue to raise finance to develop the project. But what we will be required to do is to meet some very stringent, of course, environmental guidelines, and they will be enforced by the ISA.
Right. Okay.
And if you think about them as a regulator, a lot of the undeveloped resources around the world are in developing countries, and so that comes with its own set of challenges, whether it's changing rules, unstable fiscal regimes, sometimes corruption. And so we think that the ISA, while it's somewhat of a slow-moving beast, because it was set up 25 years ago, and it has moved quite slowly, but it's about to be open for business. So it's a very exciting time, and this will be the first time that a asset that's deemed the common heritage of mankind has ever been developed. Because if we cast our mind back to the development of this industry, discovered in the 1870s, in the 1970s, they started to collect these nodules. There were consortium involving Mitsubishi, BP, Shell, Kennecott were involved, Inco, and Lockheed Martin. And so they operated on the premise that they would be able to lay claim over the area because no one had agreed who owned the oceans. And so in today's language, they spent about $1 billion. But it was the United Nations who stepped in and said, sorry, you can't develop this. And so basically all the players had to go home. Their assumption that they could lay claim was wrong. And in 1982, UNCLOS was agreed, the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea. And what that says is that, you own, as a sovereign, you own everything within 12 miles. You have an economic right to everything within 200 miles. But beyond that, it's owned by everyone. It's the common heritage of mankind. And it's a very exciting project from many aspects.
So why didn't those big guys come rushing back in once it was clarified? Because they've spent $1 billion between them. You're telling us there's a lot of money. You don't spend $1 billion if you don't think there's some economic viability to it. And I think you're making out that it was admin was the problem. So why haven't they come rushing back in?
Well, so that was in the late 70s, and of course back then you had energy companies were very diversified. So they were mining companies and they were oil and gas companies. And so, but the mining companies, well, they went looking for more land-based resources, and the oil and gas companies went looking offshore for more fossil fuels. And keep in mind, that was the late 1970s. UNCLOS was put into place in 82, but the International Seabed Authority was only established in 1994. So there's a passage of time, and a lot of that corporate memory gets lost. And so the first licenses were only granted in 2001. And of course, the we're on the doorstep now. In fact, in 2020, the final, it's called the exploitation code, was due to be in place. But due to COVID, the ISA hasn't been able to meet. And so that final code will only fall into place, we anticipate it will be next year, 2021. So that's kind of the industry is open for business when all of that falls into being. And so if you think the passage of time from the late 70s to here we are, 2020, and we're only now on the doorstep of that final certainty, thanks to the exploitation regulations being in place. So, corporations don't wait around. They don't have the patience. They have to get busy, and that's what they did. And so, you don't see, and of course, if you look at it now, our shareholders of a strategic nature have been Maersk and Allseas. Those are companies who are very familiar with the deep ocean. They are not frightened by the fact that we're in 4,000 meters of water. For them, it's like we operate there all the time. And so it's not been the mining companies that we've gone to invite in. We've purposely gone to an industry that has everything to gain and nothing to lose. And of course, the offshore oil and gas industry, the services side, has been in very poor state. And so they have a lot of expertise and a lot of assets that they're looking to repurpose. So this is a perfect industry that offers them hope.
Okay, and who else is doing this? What's the competition look like?
Yeah, so there are 17 licenses. So you have to be a sovereign or sponsored by a sovereign to have an area. And so we have 3 blocks, each 75,000 square kilometers, and sponsored by 3 developing countries, Nauru, Tonga, and Kiribati. But China are very active. The United Kingdom are active. They sponsor Lockheed Martin's application. You have the Belgians involved. You have Singapore, Korea, Japan, France, Germany. So a lot of big, heavy-hitting nations. And I guess most importantly, China. China has 3 blocks in total. 2 of them are in the CCZ, where we're focused. And we think it's important to see their progress alongside ours, because they're such an influential voice.
And so, how significantly advanced are any of those nations or companies that are being backed by those nations? Is anyone actually producing today?
No. I'd say we are at the forefront, and until we have the final exploitation code in place, then we're not able to extract and sell. And so what we're busy doing now is completing all of those steps through our pre-fees and final fees to enable us to lodge our application and then to extract for commercial gain.
Okay.
And we expect that we'll be shipping product in 2024.
Right. So again, just sort of for people who are used to sort of conventional mining, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, that you're using phrases like 43-101 and pre-fees and feasibility studies and so forth, and which kind of lends some comfort around the economics. So how do they differ with regards to that? Because again, I'm not sure if you walked up to most firms and said, right, I need you to do a pre-feasibility study for me. It's 4,000 kilometers underwater, 4,000 meters underwater and about 1,000 kilometers offshore. They'd know what to do. So how does it work?
Right. Yeah, so I guess that's one of the key assets that we've established inside of our company, the people that know how to do this. And so our resource statement is signed off by AMC, who are one of the most respected names in the industry. And so
who are they? Tell me more.
AMC are our technical lead authors for our preliminary economic assessment.
But why are they qualified to do that for you?
Because you need around resource definition. Okay, so they're probably the leading voice for the mining industry to sign off technical reports.
Underwater?
No, for resources.
Okay.
For resources. So what we've had to do is take an AMC and firstly, the resources are much easier to define. And the reason for that is that they literally sit on the water. They sit on the ocean floor. And so we don't have to drill for them or dig for them because most resources are 3D, right? Whereas ours is 2D. It just covers a large area. Think of golf balls on a driving range. That's what we have. And so we've surveyed every single piece of it. And so we have a very fine survey data, which then we complement that by taking box scores, which at regular intervals. And we take the box scores so we can measure the weight per square meter. The resource is estimated by kilograms per square meter. So we can test the grade, and so we can study any of the organisms that are living in the mud or with the nodules. So it's teaching some old dogs new tricks, basically. But to define the resource, if you were drilling holes on land, as you know, you might drill holes 50 kilometers apart, and as you get more and more certain and send the resource further up the certainty pole, you have to drill your holes a lot closer. Whereas in our case, we've agreed with our technical experts that we can take those box core samples now every 10 kilometers. That's how high the resource certainty is. It's because it correlates very precisely with the survey data that we can take. And if you go to our website at deep.green, you'll find images of how we define the resource. You'll find lots of little interviews there with our lead geologists. And you don't have to imagine it. It's there to see. And so we're taking the resource expertise of the current industry, companies like AMC. And our own project lead was formerly the global head of base metals exploration for BHP. And so, brings an enormous amount of expertise in defining or looking for and discovering resources. And so it's and if you look at some of the videos when we recover the box core samples, it is just a field of nodules. All you can see are nodules. It's
right. I like the analogy of a golf course covered in golf balls. It makes it easier for me to understand. Let's come back to the EI, because some of the problems around conventional mining are displacement of people, water tables being affected, and so forth. So I think you don't have those issues of displacing people or affecting people. There is a lot of marine life down there, presumably, and it's part of your EIA, which is the 60 million number. It's a significant number, but again, who judges that? Who's to say that what you are not doing is the right thing ecologically?
Well, ultimately, it will come down to the International Seabed Authority. So they will assess our application that we lodged with them, and so they give us some guiding principles about the areas of interest. And we obviously go and carry out that work. And if you, we need to understand what it's like down there. We're in what's known as the abyssal zone. It's the most common area on the planet. It just happens to be on the bottom of the ocean. It's an area of low energy, low food. Most of the food simply is biomass that falls down through the water column. And so you don't see plants growing down there. You don't see lots of abundant fish or wildlife. Most of the organisms are living in the mud. And so they're microbial organisms that are surviving in the sediment. And so you do find sea cucumbers and sometimes organisms that will be sitting on the nodules. So our studies have been very focused around, well, what is the impact if we take away the nodule? Because for those organisms that are sitting on them, well, that's going to be disturbed. What happens about stirring up the mud? How far will it travel? How quickly will it resettle? And then what about any impacts on the water column? Because we're using a riser to move the nodules up. And interestingly, we feel very confident around the results of all of those programs, because one of our ambitions as a company is to identify where are the lowest impact supply of these important ore bodies. If we're going to transition away from fossil fuels, we're going to need to build a lot of batteries, as we all know. And so what we looked at and have invested a lot of money into studies around this, including our white paper that we launched on Earth Day this year, titled "Where Should the Metals for the Green Transition Come From?" In fact, we just have had a subset of that white paper published in a journal, the Journal for Cleaner Production, just in recent days, which we're very proud of. And that really looked at the full life cycle analysis, the impacts of what happens if we source these metals from known land-based ore bodies, or alternatively, if we focus on nodules. And we can compress the impacts by, for example, more than 90% from a CO2 perspective. If we build those batteries out of nodules, we'll generate no tailings, because the nodules contain only very trace levels of any deleterious elements. And so we don't generate tailings, we don't generate waste material, and we only use around 10% of the amount of water. So the benefits that this resource delivers are phenomenal when you compare it to what the land-based alternatives are. And of course, you mentioned social dislocation. Tailings are another big issue that we know investors are very concerned about. And of course, just generally, the falling grade of ore bodies on land means that you have to move a lot more dirt to get the same amount of material. And so, it's time for a rethink. And I'm sure if we were starting afresh today and thinking about this from a planetary perspective, we'd be getting our metals out of the ocean. We wouldn't be digging up our most biodiverse habitats, tipping our tailings into the ocean as we sometimes do, building all these tailings dams that sometimes don't stand the test of time. Nodules are a fabulous resource.
They are. And I know you've been dealing with the ecological, environmental component there, and I do appreciate that. Can you talk to me a bit about where you are? Did you say you have done or are doing a PFS? Where are you with that? You've done one. So can you? It's obviously, I always say to people, PFSs have 30 plus or minus 30% with regards to the economics there. But can you give us a sense of the numbers, because you're telling a tale of it's available. There's a lot of nodules down there. There's thousands of square kilometers of nodules down there, and you've identified where some of those are. The environmental and ecological component, I'm buying into. I like the kind of lower or zero carbon footprint to how you go about mining. I like that, but cost. You must get this a lot. Is it? Because I know you give us a clue. You said it's lowest quartile, but how good are the numbers?
Yeah, the numbers are good, and the numbers are good for several reasons. One is the polymetallic nature of it. So in the same ton of material, we have 1.4% nickel, we have 1.1% copper, 0.2% cobalt, and 30% manganese. So, the numbers mean that each one of those would be a good resource by itself. If you looked last year, the average grade of copper mined was less than half of 1%. So we've got 1.1%, and we've got 1.4% nickel, and so on. So you've got to start with grade. And as everyone in the mining industry says, it's about grade, grade, grade. And so that's where you begin to drive the better economics. And then, of course, and this drives economics and the environmental impacts, that you don't have to move as much material. That when we collect our nodules, we put them on a transporter, we'll then send it to a processing facility but we can build that processing facility anywhere in the world. We won't have to build a new deepwater port. So that'll be one of the requirements. We will build it near a supply of renewable power. we'll build it somewhere with roads and rail and water and infrastructure. And you don't have that benefit generally in the mining sector today. And that's one of the things that will allow us to scale this much faster as well, because infrastructure is a limiting factor. If you've got to build a 5 billion new port to open up some more access, it's like, well, that's a massive hurdle. Whereas we don't have that infrastructure to be able to get going and keep moving. So that's another driver for the economics. And of course, what then makes it very timely is that the production vessels that will be the mothership that will sit on top of the water, if you like, that will then power the harvesters that will operate to collect the rocks. We can repurpose a lot of assets that were utilized for the oil and gas industry that are now lying unused. Drill ships, for example. In fact, our partner Allseas acquired a drill ship for cents in the dollar recently. A drill ship that was an $800 million asset, less than 10 years ago. A Samsung 10,000. They were able to buy cents in the dollar to repurpose for this application. And so, we'll be able to continue to do that. We'll be able to scale that idea up to be able to convert more of those ships into this production environment. And so that means some of the capital barriers that would be otherwise there dissipate. And so that's a bonus almost. But as far as, let me go back to the economics. If you look at our project as a nickel project, because just over half of the revenue will come from nickel, then we'll produce a pound of nickel for minus $3.11 per pound. So there's only one cheaper nickel producer in the world, and of course that's Norilsk. And so, but Norilsk has some limitations, right? They can't easily expand their nickel production, whereas we don't have those limitations.
Right. Okay. So when's the feasibility completed? When do you get a little bit more certainty around those numbers?
So we'll have our pilot mining system in the water in Q1 2022. And so, but generally people in the offshore industry are very relaxed about that. Back in the 1970s, they successfully operated these remote harvesters on the seafloor at 4,000 meters. And so a lot's happened since the late 70s. The development of the oil and gas industry, pipe laying, cable laying. So the expertise available to us is so much greater. And the pilot processing work will be pretty well done this year. So we'll be out of our pilot processing work. And then, of course, it's the environmental data that we're gathering. And we won't be completed those studies until we complete our pilot mining system, because one of the important elements is for us to observe and report on the impacts of the pilot harvesting. But, when you look at the impacts, we feel very, very confident that, this is the right thing to be doing. And so we'll have that completed sort of by the middle of 22. And so we'll then lodge our application, and the regulator has 330 days to give us an answer, and hopefully we'll be then into business.
Well, that was the next question. How long does that take? Because normally permitting and licensing can take longer in some jurisdictions. So International Seabed Authority have got less than a year to come back to you. Fine. Are you worried about people abusing that? Because how does the International Seabed Authority validate what you've said?
With the help of a lot of expertise. And so if you look at who the International Seabed Authority is made up of, 167 countries, including countries like Australia, big mining jurisdiction, obviously, including countries like Canada, the same. And so you have a lot of expertise available to it. And so we feel that they're going to be a tough regulator, make no doubt about it. And so, but we're happy for that. We want everyone to be held to a very high environmental standard as this industry opens up.
But is there anything that makes you nervous in there about people, because again, people abuse systems all the time, right? So the controls are, everything's underwater. You can't see what's going on. We don't know who's playing by the game and who's not. Does any of it make you nervous? Do you want to see more regulation in something like this?
We want to see the appropriate amount of regulation. And I think what the balance right now is in a good place. But the regulations also will be driven by companies like DeepGreen, who will set very high watermarks. So, for example, we're all familiar with the term digital twin. And so we want to use the digital twin, which we'll make available to the regulator. So they'll get to see what we're doing. I see no reason why we won't make it available to society, for society to look at what we're doing, because people are rightfully concerned about the impacts because they've seen some of the devastation that's happened as a result of terrestrial mining. So they're worried, oh my God, will it be the same for ocean resources? And of course, no, it won't be, because they're very different resources. So no, I'm not worried about that, Matthew. I think that I do want to strive to be, a company that's exceeding the requirements and, being very transparent as well. And travel in the open is one of our commitments, and report our successes and report our failures.
Brilliant, Gerard. I mean, thank you very much for running through that. Like I say, it's going to be new to a lot of people, and it's new to us too. So it's an overview of a new way of mining resources. It's been fascinating. And I'm sure you could spend a lot more time getting into the weeds on a lot of those topics we discussed today. You did kind of give us a bit of a clue at the beginning that you're clearly a private company now, 200 million pumped in. Any thoughts about going public at some point? Does that appeal?
Look, we are always thinking about where are the best sources of capital to help develop this industry, and we are constantly evaluating whether that is the public markets, whether that's to keep it in private hands. I very much like the idea of the higher profile that a public company brings, because, like you admitted, you hadn't heard of this resource or this industry, and most people are the same. And so one of the biggest challenges we have is how to properly disperse the right information, because most people, when they see they get the fact sheet, it's a no-brainer. Yes, of course, we don't shy away from the fact that there will be some impacts. We know that. For example, there'll be some microbial organisms that will be disturbed. Every single thing we do on this planet has an impact, right? So we own that. The fact is there'll be, a fraction of the impacts compared to the alternatives. And so having, the public markets to be able to communicate that, I think would be advantageous for the development of this industry. So it's something that, the board talk about, on a regular basis. And we get approached about it all the time, because it is a story that captures people's imagination. And so, watch this space.
Well, yeah, I think mainly, I think the thing which really captures people's imagination is the timelines that you've given. If you can come back with a feasibility study which says the economics are there and you can start producing by 2024 and show us the sorts of scale that you're going to be able to achieve, because people are looking for the next big nickel mine, okay? And that doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon, okay? The grades are getting lower. The costs are getting higher. The damage done to the environment is getting higher. There's a lot of reasons why people are a bit nervous about where this future nickel demand is going to be supplied from. So if you can start answering some of those questions, I think you can have a lot of interest for sure.
Yeah, I hope so. And we want people to be challenging, asking some of the questions that need to be asked. Like, what are the societal and environmental impacts of these metals that we're producing now? Like, I don't know if you've been to Indonesia to see what's happening with the development of the laterite industry there, but it's frightening. And of course, because they can't build tailings dams, the tailings will go into the coral triangle. So, I mean, tell me in any circumstance where that makes sense. It just doesn't, when there's a much better and safer alternative. And so, and you know, we're very, very excited that not only are we doing these studies, but we're also having, you know, such great institutions as MIT who have a big team focused on this. And I know MIT will be publishing some very important papers in the coming months, because they've been studying some of these plume subtopics. Because if you were to listen to some people, they would say the plume will have a big impact, will travel for, you know, hundreds of kilometers and will never settle. Wrong. You know, we've done our own studies, and great organizations like MIT will simply add to that. And so, you know, there are some people that just see, so they just want us to consume less and recycle more, and that will solve everything. But we know that's not the case, and I think your listeners know that better than anyone. So.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of all of the above, and yeah, we have looked at Indonesia and laterite versus sulfide and all of the pros and the cons of each. Like I say, Gerard, I know you are going to want to get back to your daughter, so thank you very much for making time whilst seeing her to talk to us and educate us about the possibilities of deep sea mining. I appreciate it. We'll speak to you again soon.
Pleasure. Thanks, man.